Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you all to the second part of legal issues. This one's going to be focusing on business entities. Bill Hulsey is he's actually our co-chair and also a mentor for SCORE Boston. And he's given this presentation for us before and has a lot of information to share with you that I think you will find useful. I want to start talking about SCORE for a moment. SCORE offers training in the form of webinars and workshops. We have started adding a few in-person workshop events. Most are still webinar. I do encourage you to watch for our newsletter and to check out the website to find out what events we have coming up. We have a lot of new topics this year, and we're very happy to be bringing those items to you. The most important thing that SCORE does, however, is mentoring. Our mentors are volunteers, thus our mentoring is always free and it is confidential. Our mentors bring a variety of experience and knowledge to business owners. A lot of folks ask me who we work with, what business stage do you need to be in? Do I need to have a business plan already? Do I need to have a business license already? You do not. We start with folks that are evaluating whether being a business owner is for them. We work with folks that are in the planning stages and working on putting everything together. And we work with folks that already are in business. Perhaps they're trying to grow their business or they need help with a marketing plan or any other business topic. We work with all those folks. I'm also asked what a beginning session or mentoring session might be like. We do mostly Zoom. We do some phone, and we do have a few face-to-face sessions. That first session is a get to know you. They want to know who you are, what your goals are for your business, and they will work with you to formulate a plan. You might even walk away with a little bit of homework. So they're working to help you get down the path towards your goals and help you progress as needed. Sometimes they invite other mentors to come along as your needs do change throughout the process. How do I get a mentor? Really easy. You can put a note in chat. Make sure the right mentor or chapter reaches out to you. You can go to the specific chapters in our district here, or you can just go to score.org and put in your zip code and it'll connect you to the right chapter. While you're on our chapter websites, I do encourage you to check out the library section. There's lots of templates you can download, blogs, little short presentations on pretty much any topic you can imagine. So I definitely encourage you to explore the websites. They're full of tons of information. We do want to use Q&A today. So if you have a question for our presenter, for Bill today, put that question in Q&A and we'll make sure it gets asked at the right time. Everything else can go directly into chat, and that's not a problem. Okay, I'm going to go ahead, pull up our presentation, and we'll get that going. Okay, it's all yours, Bill.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Teresa, for the lovely introduction. Welcome, everybody. I see that some of you may be from Rhode Island, and so everything I'm going to tell you today generally applies to both Massachusetts and Rhode Island, but there may be, I'm not as familiar with the nuances of things in Rhode Island. So if you ever have specific questions there, you can send me a question to my email and we'll try to sort those out. Again, this is a presentation on basic general legal and practical principles, and you shouldn't take this as legal advice. I tell people I'm not your lawyer, but we have referrals to attorneys if you need it. Some of them are free from the law schools around town and in Rhode Island too. So if you need legal help beyond which we can provide, let us know and we'll try to connect you with some people there. So next slide, please. Right. So again, we're about business entities here. And the reason we like to talk about entities is because it's a critical part of your business model, and more importantly, your risk management strategy. We'll talk about some other pieces of this, or maybe Dave already has in the other workshops on the Business Foundation series. But one of the things that I like to tell people is that the decision about your business entity is a conclusion of your business model. And somebody sent along to Teresa in advance a question we'll get to later about how many members and the nature of they have an intellectual property product. They're trying to decide whether to license or manufacture, and how are they going to capitalize the business, and how do they account for that stuff. And all of those questions need to be answered before you create your LLC or your structure, because the way you answer those questions will determine, and you'll see in more detail, the right entity solution for later. So I'm ready for the next slide. Thank you. Yeah, so there it is. I won't repeat that, but some of the little questions that this question so nicely encapsulated, and we'll go through later, are where's your money coming from? What's the entity really going to do? Even things in terms of tax status, and we'll go over all this, and even where the residents are, or where the members are located. Certain entities cannot be, must be made up only of individuals and citizens or permanent residents, or at least tax statuses. So we'll go over all that in detail. And again, we'll cover the questions as they come up. So I'll get to your question on when you need to pay your taxes, GJ, in a little bit, okay? So let me clear up one thing first, which is the sole proprietorship. That's where you're just doing business, or you're even doing business with what's called a business certificate or a DBA, a doing business as, is not a legal entity. If you go to Boston, if you're in Boston and you file that business certification form, you are not, there's no legal protection associated with that. You're just saying that I'm doing business under this name and so on. But you are the business. You, as the sole proprietor, are liable for all claims against your entity and so on. So you're directly responsible for all taxes, just as you would be with an LLC, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail. But a lot of people think when they file that DBA or that business certificate, they've created a legal entity, and they have not. Oops, I see I have a typo there. I should say the member must be work authorized in the United States. But a single member, will slide down to this now. The first and the easiest level of creating a formal legal entity that insulates you from risks associated with the business is a limited liability company. And that we'll talk about in a little more detail as we go through these slides. But you can have a single member LLC, which would be like a sole, I use the term sole member or single member LLC as opposed to sole proprietor, so that we don't confuse it with the previous business type, which is where you just own the business and you have no entity. You can have a single member, or you can have a multi-member LLC. The LLC, from a tax perspective, is what's called a pass-through or a disregarded entity, which means that the LLC is not taxed, only the individual member or members. If you are a single member LLC, and you may be doing this now, you will be filing your taxes on Schedule C of your 1040. If you're a multi-member LLC, your taxes are, you'll receive what's called a K-1, which is a form that's issued for partnerships, because the IRS treats multi-member income as if you were a partnership. So not to get too far into that, it doesn't have a huge huge difference on your taxing. And the real takeaway there, of course, is that you are not subject to liability at the tax liability at the corporate level. So the good thing is about the LLC, and it's something we usually encourage people to get if their business warrants it as the right model. And the other entities we're going to talk about also provide this protection, is that they protect the members in most cases from liability for actions of the LLC. So you can't get sued individually 99% of the time. So it's a great piece of that three-legged stool of risk management, where we talk about the protection afforded by the LLC, and that's usually $500 a year or so. And then there's the issue of getting the right insurance in place to cover you and the entity if you are sued for your actions. And then your contracts with your clients, where you discuss, where you make sure that you're taking responsibility and liability for things that you're in a position to control, but not taking on liability or responsibility for things that you can't control. So that's probably covered in the other session, but again, if we have time later, we can cover that some more too. Some variations on the limited liability company. One common one is if you are in a field like the health professions law or something where you've got licensed professionals, and these are people who are licensed under the state, and I think it's virtually identical in Rhode Island, you can form what's called a professional limited liability company. And the benefit there is that you are never going to be liable for the actions of the other members, the other professional members of the PLLC. So if you're in a PLLC with other doctors or lawyers, and one of them gets in trouble for malpractice, even though you're also a member of that LLC, by statute, it's going to insulate you even further than just if you were all members of an LLC. So next slide, please. So let me clear this up. I think there's still a little confusion here. I thought we had updated the slide, but I'll update it now and make sure we change this for later. The for-profit corporations, a lot of times you'll hear people talk about an S corporation. So the S corporation is a tax status. It's not a legal entity. So I'm going to have to modify this, and I'll send out a modification to clear that up. But what the S corporation is a designation that you go to the IRS and say, my LLC, my PLLC, my C corporation, my B corporation meets the following criteria. I have no more than 100 shareholders. They must be individuals. They must be U.S. citizens or permanent residents, so on. And then under those circumstances, if you meet those criteria, the S corporation, the IRS will say you're entitled to treat your revenues slightly differently. And you can treat some of those revenues as employment compensation to the members, and you can treat other compensation to the members of the LLC or whatever as capital gains or partnership distribution. So those are questions for your accountant. But the thing that I want to correct that I didn't get right on this slide, I see, is that there's no such thing as an S corporation. The S corporation is just the tax status that you get from the IRS. So again, it's a real detailed analysis that you want to talk to your accountant about there. So kind of the next step up the line is the classic C corporation. This is where you have a group of owners of the corporation, and then they issue shares either publicly or privately to the members. And the big concern there that you want to know is there's a double taxation. The corporation is taxed, and then distributions in terms of salary to the members of the owners of the company, shareholder distributions, those are taxed as well. So it's a little less tax efficient for small businesses, particularly because you're getting that unnecessary double hit. The people become C corps typically if they have shareholders lined up who are corporations, who are non-residents aliens. And where you see this a lot of times is that a company will start getting interest from venture firms or other types of inventors who want to be shareholders. They don't want to play a role in running the company necessarily, but they want their equity interest secured in something a little more formal than an operating agreement. And so they look for that C corporation, and you make the trade-off there. Again, it's a decision to be made with your attorney and with your accountant, particularly if you don't have an imminent need to issue shares to a corporate investor, because it's not difficult to restructure yourself if you're an LLC as a C corporation. And just parenthetically on that, a lot of times people online will see, file your corporation in Delaware. Or I'm starting to see people file corporations in Wyoming and all these crazy places. There's absolutely no reason not to use the state that you live in. Both Rhode Island and Massachusetts have very sophisticated regulatory schemes that a lot of times people used to choose Delaware in the past because the courts knew how to deal with corporate disputes better, but that's no longer the case. The judiciaries are just up to speed on this stuff. So there's no reason incurring the additional expense of incorporating in Delaware or setting up a LLC in Delaware, particularly because if you're actually working in Massachusetts or Rhode Island, you're going to have to file additional fees to be recognized as a foreign/Delaware corporation doing business in Massachusetts. So unless you get to a point where a venture capital says, no, we want you in Delaware because that's where all our firms are, there's no value in it. So now we can move ahead. So the professional corporation is kind of just like the professional limited liability company, but it's a corporation instead of a company. So again, these are individuals or people who are in registered professional services, lawyers, healthcare professions, and so on. And you're dealing again with the same double taxation, the corporate and the individual distributions. Again, just like all of these entities, they're set up to make the entity liable for the actions of the members, of the actions of the corporation, and to insulate liability for the individual members. The B Corp, the Benefit Corp, am I going at good speed? I'm assuming so. If you have other questions on any of these, please let me know. The Benefit Corporation is, I'm not sure, to be honest with you, how much traction this ever got. It was a big kind of thing for a while, and it has some nice goals, and it provides some protection, particularly if you're a B corporation and you're issuing shares. If you look down in Romanet 1 here, you're less susceptible to suits from your shareholders or stakeholders if you don't make maximizing shareholder value and shareholder profit your bottom line. So it broadens the discretion that you have to do what's best for the company, and including what's best perhaps for the employees at a potential cost to the shareholders in terms of their return. So it does give you that. And what comes with it is a more formal oversight of your public benefit mission. You're required to file reports every year about that, and you're held accountable by the state, your regulatory agency, to how well you're achieving those goals that you've articulated as the benefit goals that you're going to do that are different from those of a for-profit corporation. So people still do them. My experience is that you can be just as nice to your employees and just as transparent with your clients without taking on these extra steps. But for some people, they feel like it adds a halo or has some viable business reason. Maybe they think there are certain funders out there that would be more attractive to them if they were a certified B Corp. So you can always look into that. But again, my sense is that there's a lot more sizzle than steak there, as they say. So the next one is just the old partnership. It's kind of like a multi-member LLC. And again, there's no taxation at the partnership level. It's just a slightly different structure, but in many respects, in terms of taxation, in terms of how the partners define the rights and obligations that they each have under the agreement. The multi-member LLC operating agreement, it looks a lot like a partnership agreement. So there may be reasons why, from a accountant perspective, you would choose one path versus the other. But that's pretty detailed stuff that comes back into, and I think implicates this question that came in before the seminar today that we'll get to in a little bit. But again, some of these really require you to do some deep thinking. And as I led this, it's your business model, your capitalization, and so on, that's going to determine which of these is the right fit for you, not the other way around. So we can move ahead now, please. The next one, and I think maybe this is the last one that we'll talk about. We do a lot of work for nonprofits, and it's a different process. The main reason it's different is that your receipts and your revenues are tax exempt from federal and typically state taxation. What comes along with that is that you have to be engaged in some sort of charitable purpose, as defined first by the state, which recognizes you as a nonprofit, and then it's the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, who makes a designation that you're tax exempt. So it's a two-step process where you first get your recognition from the state that you're engaged in charitable activities, and that's pretty broadly defined. But then you have to go to the IRS and get that certification that you're going to be exempt from federal taxes and state taxes. Some of the big differences between for-profits and nonprofits is that no founder of a nonprofit owns the company. So unlike your Cs, your LLCs, and everything else, those profits come to the individuals. Here, you can be paid, and paid very well, to be an executive or a worker at a nonprofit, but nobody owns that $35 billion endowment that Harvard has, or any of the major universities or hospitals. That money belongs to the nonprofit. And if the nonprofit were to dissolve, those assets would have to go to another nonprofit. Not long ago, we saw a couple nonprofits related to the Boston Red Sox that had to dissolve. And so all that money they had went to other similarly situated nonprofits. So again, the first thing you're going to do, and we have very good step-by-step materials to explain this. But one of the first questions that you have, once you've gotten your state recognition, is which path are you going to follow to pursue recognition as a tax exempt organization with the IRS? And there are two basic paths here. One is filing Form 1023, and one is filing Form 1023 EZ. So the 1023 is a very extensive form, and it's meant to allow the IRS to review an application for a nonprofit that is either currently operating at a pretty sophisticated level and with pretty advanced revenues, and the kind of threshold between 1023 and 1023 EZ is whether you have in the past or anticipate in the next 3 years after filing, are you going to see revenues in excess of $50,000 a year? So if you're a startup and you're a kind of a grassroots organization, it probably, unless you've got a big grant waiting for you on the horizon, it probably doesn't make a ton of sense for you to be thinking about the 1023. And I and my colleagues, we have several very good people who have practiced in the nonprofit space, and we have a very strong nonprofit practice group, can talk you through that. And I just helped a very small organization that does computer training in the prisons here in Massachusetts. And, their revenues are going to be small. So they filed the shorter form. And one of the benefits is it's much easier and shorter, but you also get your response much, much quicker. It takes several months to get a 1023 application reviewed and hopefully positively acted on. And 1023 EZ can come back in weeks. So if you're ready to get up and running, or maybe you have a little grant that's waiting, or you want to get out and do some fundraising, the 1023 is just as valid a path as the 1023. So in addition to this, and we talked a little bit about the filings for the for-profit corporations, which are basically your annual reports and your tax stuff. Because you're a nonprofit, you have to make more disclosures to ultimately the public about what you're doing. And those take the form of two things. One is an IRS Form 990, which is called an informational return. It looks like a nonprofit tax return, but obviously there's, in most cases, no profit. And the corollary to that is the Massachusetts Form PC. So I can go to the IRS, I can go to guidestar.org and look up the Form PC of any, or Form 990 of any active nonprofit, my alma mater, Harvard University, Northeastern, where I went, or whatever. And you can do the same thing with the Mass Form PC, and you can get a lot of detailed information about the finances, where the money's going, where the money came from of those corporations. And that's because the taxpayers, because they're subsidizing the nonprofit who isn't paying taxes. The taxpayers are entitled to know more about what that entity is actually doing. So let's see, next slide then. Okay, I've talked about this a little. There's no compelling reason up front unless you've got a business reason to form anywhere but Massachusetts, or if you're from Rhode Island here, from the state of Rhode Island. If you're in another jurisdiction and you're doing business in Massachusetts or Rhode Island, you're going to have to register as what's called a foreign entity. So if for some reason you start in Rhode Island, but all your business is in, Delaware, let's say, but all your business is in Massachusetts or Rhode Island, you're going to have to register here again and pay another fee of $500 or $600 a year. The first step in the process is typically, I'm just going to mention this because a lot of people get excited about the name because it's part of their branding and marketing strategy. So the first step is you typically go on the Secretary of State's website and you do a name lookup, and then you can reserve that name for 60 days while you're deciding whether you're going to file or not. So if you're invested in a specific name for your project or your company, get in there as quickly and just make sure that that name is available to you and that you can reserve it, and then you'll move on to your next step. Now, just a little nuance here that comes up when you're filing for whatever type of entity. The state is going to ask you who your registered agent is. And the registered agent is registered to receive official notifications from the state, but also to receive complaints if there's a service, if a lawsuit has been filed against you. So you can't use, some people that are members of an LLC or founders of a corporation don't want to list their personal address there, and they don't have a corporate physical address. So they want to use a PO box, and the state says, no, you've got to give us a name or a physical location. So a lot of people that don't want to do that will hire what's called a registered agent. And they're usually pretty cheap. There's this outfit in Pittsfield, Mass for Massachusetts entities that I send people to all the time. I've never heard of complaint, but they charge $50 to be $50 a year to be your registered agent. But that's what that's about. And some people always have a moment when they're asked to give their personal address if they're going to be that, and they don't want to share that. So just as a DIY, nolo.com, I've sent these to hundreds of clients over the years. They have great step-by-step instructions for filing any of the types of entities that we've talked about today. And you don't have to hire them. SCORE volunteers can kind of help you fill out the forms. You're welcome to hire them, but you don't need to. But they just have a good process that you can follow to get your right entity in shape once you've decided which one is the right one. So let's see. All right. Okay, and I'm gonna try to weave in. Let's see, how many, do you know how many more slides are here?
This is the last one.
Oh, okay, so I'll defer these questions. So I got a couple things to talk about, but when you have depending on the type of organization that you have, if you're an LLC or a partnership, you're going to have an agreement, and this is going to get to the question that was asked before today, that lays out the rights and responsibilities and the dispute resolution processes when of the members or the partners of the entity. That's how you're going to capitalize it, how you're going to bring money out of it, what you're entitled to do in terms of being bought out, and so on. So it's an important document. We share templates with you, but we always encourage people to have their own attorney look at these and make sure that they understand that the agreement is tailored for the particular needs of the members or the partners. Your bylaws, whether you're a corporation, a B Corp, or an LLC, less so, or certainly for a nonprofit, is the governance document for your organization. It talks about who's going to play what roles, how you bring in new members, how you get rid of members if need be, the indemnification provisions in the contract if a member is sued, what rights they have to look to the entity to be defended. If you are issuing stock, and this is very complex, if you're issuing private stock or publicly traded, definitely is something you require a lawyer to look at for you. And again, we have referrals there. Sometimes the local law schools, we send a lot of people to Harvard and Suffolk University law clinics. These are opportunities for law students under supervision of law faculty and others to get experience with these business documents. We talked about the subchapter S election form. That's something usually your accountant can help you with to make sure you've positioned it correctly. A lawyer could do the same thing, but accountants typically have a good strength there. The EIN is just a simple application. It's a step in all the NOLO how-tos about how to get that IRS issued employee identification number. You'll need that as part of your application. Could be an S Corp, you'll need it if you're doing business. If you are a single member LLC, you can use your social security number as opposed to an EIN. But once you become a multi-member LLC or any of the other entity statuses we talked about, you're going to need to get that EIN. So we talked a little earlier about the DBA certificate in the context of being a sole proprietor, an unincorporated business. But there's another use for that, which is if you have an LLC that you're not going to be operating. A lot of times the LLC has a rather generic name, but you've branded one or more of the business entities that are under that LLC by certain names. If you are Bill's LLC, right? But I'm operating a nail salon and I want to have a nice branded name for that, I would go to the town I'm in and I would say Bill's LLC is doing business as Fancy Nail Salon name, so that's an alias, but it lets people know, if they care to know, who's behind that business name that may be separate from my personal name or the name of the entity. So if there's no questions other than these two that I'll get to, JG, we got a very good kind of thoughtful question the other day about, which is a very classic question about kind of what entity do we choose? And I'll frame it, and if you're on the call today, maybe you can educate me if I got it wrong, because I'm working from memory, but they have some intellectual property that they have invented and are thinking about what their commercialization strategy is, in terms of, do they want to manufacture and maybe distribute the product and sell it, create their own supply chain or pieces of it, or do they want to try to license it? How do they capitalize the venture based on, because those capital needs are going to be very different. And then the kind of the fundamental question of, how do we, if it's just two of us, do we have each of us owning 50% of the business? How do we provide for an impasse if we reach a dispute and neither of us are a majority shareholder? So all really great and very, very common questions in these situations. Just make sure if I got that right. I think that's it again here. Yes, so thank you, Jason. I think this clears this up, and you can all see that. So I think you want to start with, what's your most likely commercialization strategy? Because it's going to be very different in your capitalization. I know that this defers the issue of decision making, but I'm going to tell you why. Because if you're thinking about licensing, your capital requirements are going to be less, and unless the two people who are, I'll call them the inventors and founders, are going to provide all the capital, if you're going a manufacturing path, then other people are going to come into that mix who are going to want to play a role and have rights in the decision making. So you're going to have to figure out the rights that you give somebody as an investor. And there's ways to do that through an LLC, through loans and other things. There are ways to do that by issuing shares. If you go a corporate route, you can create passive or limited liability partnerships where investors play no role in the management. So it's hard to answer with much more specificity that question until we know a little more about at least what you think is your current thinking about that. If we go back to your question about, what do we do if it's a 50-50 split? Well, these things are like prenups. You only need them when the marriage goes bad, typically, right? So you're wise to be thinking about it. But the one thing you can do is agree that you're going to mediate if need be. Mediation is a very powerful tool to get people on the same page. You can agree that you'll arbitrate if it's a very significant issue. Again, and some of this may have to do with the size of the dispute. Somebody wants out and you're debating what they're entitled to in terms of compensation and so on. So, some of this can be very granular, Jason, and can really depend on what you think might be a dispute, and you can even structure it. Another thing you can do is you can always create, if it's just, one of, and this is not uncommon, it happened to Steve Jobs, if you'll remember, he and the company stopped sharing the same vision. So, he moved on and then they went and then he came back. So it happens. People still have viable business models. They just don't see the company going the same way. So you can have one way to do that if you're in that situation is have the parties agree to a buy-sell number. That you agree that this is the number I'll pay for the entity, or this is the number you can pay me to get out of it. And some of that would be always, if you're in an operating agreement or a partnership agreement, you'll address those details in there. So if you, I think Teresa usually includes my email, you can always make an appointment with me and we can dig down on this a little more and see where you are and bring in some other folks too, maybe to help understand a little more about how you're planning to move the business forward. Let's see here. Yeah, exit strategies are typically included in there. What are my rights when I have to get out, God forbid? What are the rights of my heirs when I die? What are my rights to sell my interest in the company without permission of the other member or members? So, they're all of a piece, but I think if you are interested, we can talk through those in a little more detail and see if we can create some better structure around that. So I'm going to move on, Jason, but just Q&A back in if you didn't think that was responsive. So back to you, GJ. Yes, so an LLC or the members of the LLC, because the LLC is not paying any taxes, but this would be the same if you were incorporated as an LLC or just acting as the sole proprietor. You typically have to pay what's called quarterly estimated income taxes. And you can go online. TurboTax and the other software packages do a pretty good job. If you're using an accountant for your personal and business taxes, run this by them. I'm not an accountant. And so, but my understanding is it's really a function of the rest of your withholding as well. The general principle is that the IRS doesn't want to lend you, and the state doesn't want to lend you money for a tax year if your obligation at the end of that year was so significant that you should have been paying them interest and maybe penalties. So what your accountant would do would be to look at your other sources of income and make sure that at the end of the day, your total liability from all sources for taxes would not be such that you've asked the IRS or the state to defer collection of taxes above a minimum amount. But I don't think, GJ, that amount is fixed. I think it depends on the rest of your I think it's a percentage. Okay. What would you do for an online business and you travel? So that means most of your customers are truly online, or you're traveling to deliver services in other jurisdictions. So if your clients are all online and you're never touching down to a plant or to consult in a business in another state, typically I think of this as a foreign. Are you doing business in that state, and are you subject maybe to taxes somehow? But and the way they typically do it, they define the term doing business as kind of on a state-by-state basis, but flying in for a one-off consultation or something like that is typically not considered doing business as, but you kind of have to look to the rules to the states where you are delivering in-person services. And then the question would be, do you have to register as an agent, as an entity doing business there? It is a little state by state, but again, the general rule is if you're coming in, so all your customers, thanks GJ, all your customers are online. There's certainly no need for you to register as a foreign entity in that situation if you're never physically in another state. the tax situation generally is going to be that you're going to be taxed in the jurisdiction in which you are resident or your business is resident. So if you are a Massachusetts or Rhode Island resident and your business is in the state that you live in, it's just going to look like you were earning income from customers that were in your state. Okay. What might happen if an unincorporated business does not it's not registered as, nothing happens because you don't get any value, Stephen, from registering and doing business as. You don't get any protection from legal liability. Well, let me take that back. I think technically, I know this is true for Boston. There is a penalty structure if it turns out that you have failed to register your unincorporated business as doing business as. As a practical matter, I mean, it's only $50 to do it. So I think is the number in Boston. So it's not a huge drain and that's a tax deductible expense for you, but it's kind of like how fast you like to drive, I think. I know what the speed limit is and I know how fast I drive. So there's kind of a risk assessment there if $50 is meaningful to you in terms of how likely are you to be caught and what's the damage if you had failed to properly register your business. And, you know, if it was $500, I might think of it differently, but because whatever the risk is, it's probably very low that you're going to be caught and punished, but the ability to avoid the risk is probably $50 or so. So maybe it's worth it to do that. But I think what would happen, again, without going too far, is that you'd get a knock on your door from somebody at City Hall saying that you didn't register and here's what you need to do. Okay. No open questions. All right, well, I guess I shouldn't say I
Yeah,
guess.
sorry, my mouse froze there for a moment, but yes, I do not see any further questions. If somebody wants to, what is it? Oh, we got.
So Elaine, just type in Pittsfield registered agent, and I think you'll find this company.
Is there a
Pittsfield,
minimum?
Hmm?
Sorry, go ahead. There's another question in the other. Is there a minimum?
I thought I had answered that. Let me try it again. So I think there's not a minimum. I think you need to talk to your accountant because it's a function of they want to make sure that you're, for example, I am at a stage in my life where I'm drawing from my retirement accounts. So I know I'm paying more in taxes than I'm going to ultimately pay. So I'm overpaying there. So if I do a couple hours of legal work, I might not file a quarterly estimated tax return because I know that my end of the year liability is still going to be less than the amount of taxes I would have paid. But it's really GJS kind of a case by case decision that you need to talk to an accountant about. I'll double check, but I'm pretty sure that answer. Okay, thanks, GJ.
All right, I think that's all the questions we have.
Beautiful.
Certainly, if anyone thinks of something later, you can reach out to me at outreach@scoreboston.org, and I'm happy to schedule you with into Bill's schedule or one of our other mentors for that matter.
Yep.
We have several mentors that can answer these types of questions. So we can get you scheduled with them if you think of something later. And I posted in there where to find the recording. Give me 24 hours to get that up. But it'll be there shortly if you want to review anything. Thanks, Bill.
You're welcome.
Great information as always. And we look forward to seeing the rest of you at our next webinar. Thank you.
Thanks again. Bye, everybody. Thanks for your good questions.